Hi everyone. All of us have to frequently critically evaluate research papers. If you are a PG student, you may have to do that as a part of the journal clubs you have to present. If you are a researcher, when you are preparing your protocol, when you are evaluating the topic that you have chosen to do a research on, so for that you have to search the existing literature and you have to evaluate the previous studies on the topic and find their drawbacks and all, so that you can make a space for your study. If you are a clinician, again lots of studies keep coming, so before you accept some of their suggestions to your own practice, you have to do a critical analysis of your own to make sure that these findings are indeed important and relevant for you. So how to do that, that is what we are going to discuss in the four videos that are going to be posted in this channel. One doubt many of you may have is do I have to keep a critical eye on reading articles from even the reputed sources, even say journals published by professional organizations, journals that have a good impact factor, journals that are indexed in Medline, renowned journals like Science or Nature or New England Journal of Medicine and all, or is it that I can accept them blindly and only if they are from some less known journal or in some unpublished thesis or dissertation, only then I have to do a critical evaluation and use all the techniques that we will be discussing in this presentation. So this doubt many of you may have. So what I would like to suggest is, whenever you are reading a research paper from whatever source, it is better to keep a very vigilant eye, proceed with caution, because no source is there that you can very blindly believe. Let me show you some recent highly controversial examples. This news was there some months ago in June. The world's some of the best journals Lancet and New England Journal of Medicine, they had to retract some papers which were very important, very celebrated, discussed in the media about it was about the role of hydroxychloroquine in the prevention of COVID-19. But those articles had to be retracted because subsequently many experts found out that there are some flaws in the articles. Now, this was again another article that came around that time itself. This article claimed that the 5G technology has a role in the etiology of COVID-19. And if you look at it, now this particular article was published in a journal that is indexed, included in PubMed. So as I told you, no source is immune. As a reader, as a researcher, as a student, you have to keep your brain, your skills of critical analysis always open. Only then you can ensure that you are not falling into the trap of bad research. You are not blindly following or believing what studies with erratic methodology have found. So always proceed with caution. At the same time, I would like to also add a rider here. At least ensure that when you are reading a study, at least ensure that that is from a peer-reviewed journal, because peer review offers some kind of at least a stamp of approval, because it at least means that the article has been through the hands and eyes of 2-3 experts who have some expertise and experience in that topic. So they have given that green signal for publication, so that you can believe them at least some extent. Suppose if it is not peer reviewed, if it is there are many journals that are not peer reviewed, articles coming from those journals, better don't read them at all. But if you are reading them, you use all your analytical skills before making any decisions based on those papers. Also, there is also an exception to this. Like I told you, everything should be peer reviewed. But in the past some years, these preprint surveys have earned a lot of popularity, especially in times like this, like during COVID-19 and all, because there is a lot of new science coming, and peer review as such is slightly slow. So there are many authors who, what they do is, once the study is ready, before they submit that paper to a journal, they post that in some preprint surveys. Those kind of articles, you need not avoid them, because I told you they are not peer reviewed, because they are going to be peer reviewed. Most likely they are going to appear in some peer reviewed journals. Even in those preprint surveys, there itself many people may have done some critical comments and all. So there are loads and loads of preprint surveys depending on the discipline, etc., etc. So especially if you are looking for like information on some new and upcoming topic, you can indeed read articles from preprint surveys, and you need not discredit them saying that they are not peer reviewed. Only the thing is that you too have to apply your own judgment and analytical skills. Now, all the research papers, especially in the biomedical domain, have prescribed format. They have that introduction, methods, results, and discussion. That's called IMRAD format. So what we will be doing is, in each of these videos in this series, we will be discussing one of these sections. What all points you should look for when you are critically analyzing an article. So we will start with the introduction section in this particular video. So some of you may be asking, no, why I am starting with the introduction. Journal articles have other sections also. They have the titles, they have the abstracts. So there no need that I have to do a critical analysis of those sections. What I would like to suggest is, you need not believe them at all. You don't believe anything the title says, anything the abstract says. You have to read the proper article, the full article, go through each of the sections. Only after that you make any judgment. Why? Let me show you some examples. The titles are can be grossly classified into two. Like there are titles like this: computer assisted CBT for child anxiety, results of a randomized clinical trial. So here what they are saying is, they are not giving any indication about what the results of the study are. Now they are just talking about what is the intervention, what is the condition, what is the population, what is the design, that's all. They are not giving any hint about what they found. These kind of titles are called indicative titles, and titles should be like this. On the other hand, there are also titles that give you the result also in a nutshell. Please see this. Routine CBT for anxiety and depression is more effective at repairing symptoms of psychopathology than enhancing well-being. So what they are saying is, they are declaring here itself that the intervention is more effective. That kind of titles are called declaratory titles, but never believe what the titles declare. You have to reach at your own conclusions after going through their methods, their tables, their result section, etc., etc. Because the problem is, in titles like this, they can do a lot of oversimplification and exaggeration, because obviously the authors want that the readers, the editors, the reviewers be impressed, the media people be impressed, their study be discussed, and also they may try to spin. We will discuss the word in one of the coming videos. They may try to spin the title to make it look more attractive. So don't believe any claims like this in the title. Now also, even if the title is indicative, it is not declaring the results, even then there can be a problem. Like for example, see this title: a cancer distress reduction with a couple based skills training and RCT. So if you see a title like this, what do you expect? You expect that that's an RCT about whether a couple based skills training can reduce cancer distress, right? They studied the cancer distress part, and then they assessed whether there is an improvement in that domain if they give the intervention. But again, if you read ahead, you read the abstract. What abstract says is, this study aims to investigate the utility of providing dyadic skills to this couple. So it is not about specifically about this cancer distress reduction. And also, if you read the methods in the abstract, what they are saying is assessments with self-report and behavior observation of both partners were conducted 4 times over 16 months. Here again, this particular variable is not mentioned at all. Now, so then from where did this come? Again, you go further ahead into the article, and if you see their table, actually you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 variables they have assessed. and this is only one of them. Cancer specific distress is only one of them. So they took that to their title probably because they had some significant findings there, but that is not like something you can blindly believe. By seeing the title you may feel that this is the only variable they studied. Out of 9 for one variable they got it. So like that was a kind of a misleading title. That why I am telling you, even if the title is only indicative, even then you should not blindly believe that. You have to look in depth into the proper article itself. Now about the abstract. So why I told you that you should not blindly believe an abstract. Again, there are lots of examples. I will just show you the summary in a study. A scoping review of comparisons between abstracts and full reports in primary biomedical research. This came in BMC Medical Research Methodology in 2017. So what they did was like it is a review of various studies. Those studies analyze the abstracts, like whether there is a mismatch between the abstract and the full report, or the abstract is saying only what is there in the full report. That is what is studies assessed, and this review like reviewed all kind of studies like that. And what they found was, interestingly, in 4 to 78% of the like papers in various studies there was some inconsistency. Up to 78% of the abstracts had a mismatch with whatever the full paper says. And not only that, there is major inconsistency in up to half, 5 to 45%. So in up to half of the abstracts there is a mismatch from what is actually stated in the full paper. So I repeat, there is like you don't blindly believe the abstract. You should approach an abstract only with a lot of questions. Now moving on to like the proper part, the how to critically analyze, critically evaluate the introduction section of a research paper. So basically you have to check for 3 things in the introduction section. Soon we will have another presentation on how to write the introduction section if you are a researcher planning to write your article. But in this one we will be very briefly looking at how to critically analyze somebody else's paper. So the first point you have to check is why was the study needed. That is the major purpose of the introduction section. Like any new study has to advance knowledge in the field. It has to be novel. It has to provide a critical review of the existing literature on that particular topic, and declare some drawbacks, some limitations of that existing research, and then put forward that like we try to overcome these limitations by such and such methods. That is how you find like propose a place for your own paper to your readers, to the peer reviewers, to the editors and all. So you have to check that part in the introduction section, whether the study is new, whether the study is an advancement over the existing literature. If it is not so, there is no point in you wasting your time reading their study or analyzing their study, because there are already better studies over there. So like how others are supposed to do that, let me show you an example. This title we already discussed, computer assisted CBT for child anxiety. So from the introduction section of this particular article, those authors have made some comments about the previous studies done on the area. Like the therapies in the previous studies were psychologists trained in CBT for child anxiety, thus limiting generalizability to untrained clinicians. So the previous studies had limited generalizability because their sample was trained psychologists. So that is one point. So that is one limitation of the existing literature these authors tried to overcome. Also, like there was a lot of dropout. 33% of children and 60% of parents completed all sessions. So these authors were trying to have a better like retention rate. So that is how the authors should like claim that their own study is much better to the existing literature. So whether authors have made this kind of claims, you should check that in the introduction section. And also like some of the areas in which the authors can claim that their study is superior. What are the major limitations that were there in the existing literature? It could be wrong design. The previous studies, though the research question was there, they used the design that is not appropriate for that particular question. So we will discuss that in the coming video on the method section. Like as we told about the previous study, the authors can claim that the previous studies, their findings have limited generalizability because of various inclusion criteria, exclusion criteria and all. They may have used, the previous studies may have used imperfect measurement instruments without sufficient reliability, validity. For example, somebody is doing a study in psychiatry or psychology in India, they have to ensure that if it is a self-rated scale, if the patients are rating themselves, then it should be in the local language. That particular version should have been like properly translated and all. So this kind of information, whether it is there in the introduction section, that you have to check. High dropout rate, again we saw an example already. Like in the previous studies there was high dropout rate, so this particular study is trying to like minimize that. So that is an advantage. These kind of claims, if it is there in the introduction section, that shows that this study is actually novel, it is better than the existing literature. Now the next question that you have to ask is, what exactly is the research question? Almost all published studies most likely will have stated specific questions that they try to address. So what you have to decide is, first, okay, you check whether they have mentioned a specific question, and if it is given there, whether that is important enough a question, whether that is relevant for you, for your research, for your clinical practice and all. If it is not there, like nobody is going to compel that you read the entire study. So whether that is important, that is relevant for you, that you have to keep in mind. This is an example of how good authors specify their research question. The present study thus attempted to assess cognitive functions of a group of euthymic and stable bipolar patients in their first episodes. 1. The second objective was compare and contrast cognitive profiles of first episode bipolar patients with those who had experienced multiple episodes. So ideally there should be one main question and one or two sub questions, secondary objectives. If the study had 7, 8 objectives, no, that is not a very good study, because they are just doing some kind of a blind fishing to catch whatever comes their way. So that is not a good study. Now the third question that you have to ask is whether they have mentioned a hypothesis or not. What were the author's hypotheses? For example, this is a good example of how to mention a hypothesis. Usually that is done towards the end of the introduction section. So here, like the authors have reviewed the previous studies, I told you already. Like they have summarized the limitations of the previous literature. Relatively few previous studies have investigated motor function in unmedicated depressed patients, so they are doing a study. So that space is built. After that, they are declaring their hypothesis. Whether they have a major hypothesis, patients with major depression who have not been treated for at least 1 month exhibit disturbances in motor physiology as assessed by. So that is a very good hypothesis. They have very good specifications about what kind of sample they are assessing. Major depression, again those who have not been treated for at least 1 month, and other disturbances in motor physiology, very specific. And how that is measured, again measures of force steadiness, etc., etc. So they are stating that. So that is a good way of stating hypothesis. Not only that, they are also making the space for a second hypothesis. So the next part they are saying, they are explaining why they have a second hypothesis. Then they are stating a second hypothesis, saying that, specifying that there is a second hypothesis. And after that, the introduction section is over. They are moving to the method. So that is how good studies like state their hypothesis. You check whether the study that you are evaluating has done this. At the same time, okay, before that, like these studies that have mentioned a hypothesis are called a confirmatory studies, because what they are doing is they already have a pre-specified hypothesis. They are trying to confirm that hypothesis, or trying to see whether that hypothesis will be refuted. So such studies are called confirmatory studies. On the other hand, there will be also studies that do not pre-specify their hypothesis. For example, this one that we saw earlier, as an example of stating the objective, the introduction section ends with this, their objectives. They are not specifically mentioning what their hypothesis was. So that kind of studies, like where they do not pre-specify their hypothesis. Like earlier we saw that they are checking for these things, but here if you look at the table of this particular paper, you can see that they have assessed so many variables: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, about 13 variables they have assessed. So they don't have any pre-specified hypothesis. They are blindly checking in any of these domains whether they can get any significant difference. So these kind of studies are called exploratory studies, because they don't have pre-specified hypothesis. They are just exploring. So exploratory studies are usually done for only those areas where there is no existing information. That is an area that is totally new. Like they don't have, the information is insufficient to form pre-specified hypothesis. They are trying to generate hypothesis. Many a time, like the study, if it is exploratory, that will be mentioned in the title. They will say that it is an exploratory study, but for many papers it may not be so. It will not be there in the title. From their introduction section, from their methods, from their tables and all, you will have to make a decision for yourself that that particular study is not a confirmatory study, that is just an exploratory study. So basically, how like it happen? What the major difference between these is, as I told you, hinted to you already. Usually, like there is a very new area. For example, again, management of COVID-19, something like that. So there isn't any previous information, previous hypothesis available. So without any previous hypothesis, we study a lot of variables. That is our exploratory research. From that, like we get some hypothesis. Like I showed you earlier, no, they are studied so many variables. Suppose they find some significant relationship in one or two variables, then you can generate some hypothesis from there. But you cannot believe that hypothesis. You cannot say that that hypothesis has been like confirmed. For that, you have to do further studies. So a study cannot at the same time generate hypothesis and also test those hypotheses. Some studies generate hypotheses, then others have to be done afresh to confirm those hypotheses. So after that, using this hypothesis, you do a confirmatory research, and after that, once that hypothesis is checked in this confirmatory research, only then if it is confirmed, you can say that this hypothesis is correct. So that is it about the introduction section. We will be posting more videos soon, and we have, those of you who are new to this channel can have a look at some of our recent videos. Once again, those of you who haven't subscribed, do click the subscribe button. Thank you.